This week on Quadriga, Helmut Kohl, Europe's last visionary. He was first elected Chancellor of West Germany in 1982. When he left office 16 years later, the face of Germany and Europe had changed almost beyond recognition. With other leaders of the era, he laid the foundations for today's European Union. And at home, he led a divided nation to reunification after 40 years of fear and distrust. But in the end, he was rocked by scandal involving illegal donations, a bitter close to an illustrious career. The former chancellor is still dogged by accusations about his years in office. Now he's back in the limelight. Helmut Kohl, a leader who shaped Europe and left a disputed legacy. Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. October 1st, 2012 will mark the 30th anniversary since Chancellor Kohl took office. For 16 years, he was the longest-serving German chancellor from 1982 to 1998. He was very much in charge of German and certainly also European affairs. And so we are here today to discuss his political legacy together with Michael Stürmer, who is the chief correspondent for the German daily Die Welt. He was also a political advisor to Chancellor Kohl. Matthias Lohre is a political correspondent for the German daily Die Taz. He focuses mainly on the CDU. And Pascal Thibault, who is a Germany correspondent for Radio France International. He's been based in Berlin for over 20 years. Thank you all for being here. Michael Stürmer, you were Chancellor Kohl's political advisor for...
I was one of many.
One of many, but still you worked with him for a significant amount of time. If you look at how the European debate is being led and how the Euro crisis is being dealt with these days, do you wish he was still in office?
Well, it's a very hypothetical question. He believed that in 1990, when the wall came down and everything was up in the air, that Europe needed a new equilibrium, because he vastly overrated the economic strength of East Germany, which was it was a classical case, or it was a monumental case of data laundering to present East Germany as the California of the Comic-Con of the East European or Soviet economy. So something was needed. The French press fantasized about the Quatrième Empire. I'm sorry to say, but it was pretty over the top. So that was the point where the common currency would serve as a kind of balancer, and everybody would be happy ever after. And, of course, he was warned time and again, including by the chief of the Bundesbank and of lesser people like myself, that this was absolutely premature because the economies were too different, the social contract was too different. And until today, he believes it was a stroke of genius. And that, as de Gaulle once said, la politique, the politics leads and l'intendanture, all the economic paperasserie will follow. Well, it doesn't. You don't have to be a Marxist to understand that economics, social contract, manners and morals do matter very much, and that the currency is the epitome of a nation's identity.
And indeed, Matthias Lohre, you have not worked with Chancellor Kohl, but you're still old enough, if I may say, to still remember him as Chancellor. Mm-hmm. What would you say these days when Germany marks the 30th anniversary of him taking office? What do you think, in particular, his European legacy will be?
I think the decision what his European legacy will be has not been decided. It has not been clear what will happen, because obviously history is in the making and people do not really know what will become of the euro. So maybe in 10 years everybody will say, yes, Helmut Kohl has been the architect of the euro. But maybe in 10 years the euro will not exist anymore. So it's really hard to decide what his achievements are and what he has done. I know, Herr Stürmer, you have a different view.
He certainly was and will always be considered the architect. The question is, was the euro a blessing or was it a curse?
Yeah, but still, you can decide that now. This is a really interesting question that you can't really give an exact answer to, because maybe it will work, but maybe it won't.
And Pascal Thibault, let's bring the French in here. Chancellor Kohl is widely considered certainly the architect of German reunification, but also the driving force behind the creation of the euro, along with former French President François Mitterrand. How is Chancellor Kohl being perceived in France these days, particularly vis-à-vis the European debate?
I think for French people, or for French people who are interested in politics, I mean, it's quite a long time ago when Helmut Kohl left the power, 1998. I think he is still and he will remain for us, as I think in a lot of other countries, a very important politician for the construction of the European integration. And as you remembered with François Mitterrand, he also achieved quite a lot of projects, especially the introduction of the euro, and before that the Treaty of Maastricht, etc. That's what Michael Stürmer said, with the necessity also for a very important ally like France after the reunification to obtain a certain equilibrium between the two countries after France left more or less its traditional status during the Cold War.
And indeed, there are some people who say that the euro was the price Germany had to pay for reunification.
That goes too far.
That's what is usually said. It's a good question if maybe it's too far to say that, but it's usually presented as a gift, more or less, to compensate the reunification. I'm not absolutely sure that it's true, but
and neither seems to be Michael Stürmer.
The time are more or less the same, because the reunification was 1990, and the first step to the euro began more or less in this period.
Michael Stürmer, you seem to have an issue?
I think it's a very dangerous assumption, even a legend. It was pushed forward, but it was not the price. Mitterrand was far too intelligent and experienced to say, La France dira non. A French no would have been impossible in the face of a huge crisis, of a world crisis, which, among other things, might have entailed a major war. This was not the time to pose conditions which were in the face of the Americans, in the face of the Russians, in the face of the Germans. It couldn't be done. What happened was that Mitterrand sort of recovered French monetary sovereignty that had been lost to the Bundesbank. The Banque de France and French monetary policy ever since the early 1980s was a kind of prisoner, is perhaps too much, but it was in a bind to the Bundesbank. The Bundesbank was determining French monetary policy and thereby the French social equilibrium. And that was, of course, an insult to French pride. The French like to say they have their Deutschmark, we have our bombinette, meaning the nuclear weapon. That was overdone, but this was the dimension in which you have to see the whole thing. And France and Germany, after the dollar was decoupled from gold, went into the snake, the so-called snake, which meant that everybody had to intervene once the exchange rate went over a certain peg. And that happened in the 1980s, and France was in the deepest of trouble, and the Bundesbank intervened on the request of Chancellor Kohl. And the Bundesbank did it with great reluctance. But this was the real history, the beginning of the history of the euro, because this was a situation which in a way, couldn't last forever. It was a complete imbalance. That should have warned Chancellor Kohl not to engage in a full currency union. The snake was much less than that. In a full currency union, binding together two totally different, not totally, but fairly different economies.
And Matthias Lohrer, would you say that the euro crisis, which has been going on for almost 3 years, is sort of shedding a new light to the European integration efforts and contribution of Chancellor Kohl?
I think it does. It's not black and white. I don't want to say that Helmut Kohl has done everything wrong. I don't think that anybody, even on the left side in Germany, is saying that anymore. But I think it was obvious back then, and it is obvious again today, that Helmut Kohl did not really think about the economic implications. I mean, there have been Karl Otto Pöhl, who resigned from office at the Bundesbank, saying, I cannot do that. I can't just say that the exchange rate between Ostmark and Westmark for one-to-one is a good idea. It's not. It has not been a good idea.
And there was also the euro, which also caused Pöhl to resign.
Of course, and but I think this incident really shows that even back then there were people who knew we have to make a foundation that's not only political, but we have to make a foundation based on economy. And I think now we can see that again, because in the last 20 years, people have always focused on the political implications of the euro, but not on the economical. And now, in the crisis, we see what has been neglected in the last 2 decades.
I think it's a difference also between Helmut Kohl and probably Chancellor Merkel. I think Helmut Kohl was had an animal instinct, more or less, as we said during the reunification, because of the short time he needed to achieve that, and because also of the introduction, for example, of the euro, and the economics were not the intendants, as you said, were not so important for him. And today I have the impression that the analysis of the European problems today of Mrs. Merkel is more an economical one and less a political one. And I think a better balance would be probably better today also.
And due to the euro crisis, many people are saying there's a lack of leadership within the European Union. They point towards Chancellor Merkel, they point towards François Hollande, and etc. and etc. Do you think the leaders of the types of Chancellor Kohl is what we would need at a time like this?
I mean, I wouldn't say we need a second Helmut Kohl today, but probably I think we have to say maybe we need some more years to analyze in a better way what the today politicians do. But I don't have the impression that's true that the European politicians of our days have the same visions some colleagues of them had in the past. I don't see them, unfortunately. I don't have also the impression that some personal decisions they take in the past, like with for the European Union with Mr. Van Rompuy or Frau Ashton, was an illustration of the will to have very big, very important people, very charismatic persons.
You are far too polite. You are far too polite. Both candidates were brought in because they were weak, unknown, and the heads of government could play football as they liked and sort of compromise the rules as they liked. Mrs. Ashton, she's now in office for almost 2 years, and she has not made any significant difference, although she is not lacking in funds and personnel. The question is not a great leader. Now, this is such a complex maze of regulations and real forces. No, what you need is a great communicator, if possible 2 great communicators, one in the Élysée and one just round the corner in the Bundeskanzleramt. And you don't have great communicators. Angela Merkel has great tactical qualities, but a great communicator explaining to the people when we will be on firm ground, why all this suffering has to be done, she is not.
And of course, Chancellor Kohl was very much shaped and defined by the two world wars, certainly the Second World War. And he took the EU and he saw the EU as a guarantor, if you will, for lasting peace.
A great peace project, yes. But,
indeed.
But that was, of course, overdone because the same Chancellor Kohl who feared war among the Europeans so much turned a blind eye to what was happening in the Balkans. So to think about war between Benelux and Germany or France and Germany at the time of the Cold War, at the time of nuclear weapons, was way out, far beyond anything real. While at the same time, where it was needed to intervene massively, militarily in the Balkans, we said, no, it's not for us because we have such a terrible past. We hid behind our past, which is a miserable thing to do.
And Matthias Lohre, Chancellor Kohl, obviously is in a very frail condition. He's 82 years old now, had a major accident a few years back, and he has somewhat of a speech impediment. But when he speaks very much still in favor of Europe. Here's what he said. He said, Euro still holds the key. The Euro still holds the key to lasting peace in Europe. And let's put aside national egotism in favor of Europe. That's what he said a couple of days ago when he spoke in front of the CDU here in Berlin. Would you agree with him?
Well, it's easy to agree with Mr. Kohl when he uses these really general terms, obviously. But I know that it's always depends on who says something, not always what somebody says. And in this case, obviously, it's on the one hand the legacy of Mr. Kohl, who obviously wants to save what he has done 20 years ago, and that's really understandable. But when he's saying that. The day before yesterday here in the Bundestag towards the Christian Democrats, it's something different. It's Angela Merkel more or less trying to become the official heir of Helmut Kohl, and she can now use more or less Helmut Kohl to give herself, who, as Mr. Stürmer just said, is not that great in explaining the crisis. Mr. Kohl can give her the explanations, can give this emotional view on Europe that she will never deliver. And so I think it's helpful for the Christian Democrats and for all the people who call themselves conservatives. It's really good for them to have this Helmut Kohl who says these things, although it's really general. But obviously, it's not only historical, it's always meant in a tactical way, especially for Angela Merkel today.
And since you mentioned it, the relationship between Chancellor Merkel and Chancellor Kohl obviously is somewhat, if you say complicated, so let's call it that way. Do you think that Chancellor Merkel, tried to use the 30th anniversary sort of to capitalize on his political legacy 1 year before the election?
Of course. I'm really sure about that. On the one hand, I think it's a really new tradition to say, why is it important that a chancellor took office 30 years ago? It's not really important. It's important if a party decides so. And in this instance, obviously, the Christian Democrats. And even the biography that's published now had help from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the foundation of the Christian Democrats. That's not diminishing the work of the historian. It's just showing that this has been planned by the CDU as well, and obviously I think it will be helpful for the CDU because Merkel will never deliver the historical speech that everybody's allegedly accepting from her. And Helmut Kohl, on the other hand, will be reintegrated into the big history of this big party, and 1 year before the elections, and that's helpful for both. And they probably will never like each other again, but that's not the question.
You see,
I just wanted to say, excuse me, that on the other hand, the fact that Mrs. Merkel uses or needs somebody who nowadays is not able to speak, more or less, because she has a communication problem about Europe, especially. I think it underlines, of course, the big problem Mrs. Merkel has, because I mean she can't use the big speeches of Helmut Kohl because he's unable to deliver them, but she is more or less like the stature of the commander, more or less like in a big opera, and just to play this big role for a nice photo. Maybe it would be useful for her for the next month, especially for the next elections.
But isn't it somewhat common, even in France and the United States, to sort of lean back on former presidents to sort of lend a bit of their glory?
Obama did it at the Democratic Convention.
That's
when
right.
He invited Clinton to deliver a fantastic speech.
I mean, yeah, maybe Hollande will also use Jacques Delors. Who knows? I mean, it's a common tactical play. Huh?
But the fact, of course, is, Michael Stürmer, that Chancellor Kohl criticized Merkel's handling of the euro crisis.
Massively. He did an interview a year ago, an authentic interview a year ago, which was devastating. It was daggers drawn. But why does Angela Merkel... You have posed the right question. What is so special about the 30th anniversary? I was there, and I remember very well the high drama in the Bundestag. It was unusual drama. That is one reason. But the overriding reason is, of course, that Angela Merkel has turned the CDU in a kind of the second social democratic party. She has taken away the shoes and the socks of the Social Democrats wherever she could, but at a price. She has created an enormous void in tradition, identity, values, all the things that in the time of Helmut Kohl made the CDU and also the CS comparatively comfortable and warm place. Angela Merkel's CDU is a very different animal from what it was 20 years ago. And into this void, she drags the man in the wheelchair and borrows from him legitimacy, just as the medieval emperors sort of borrowed legitimacy from the Roman Empire. And it's done everywhere that you borrow from the past to enhance your own stature, and that's exactly what Angela Merkel is doing. But her style and Helmut Kohl's style are so utterly different. Helmut Kohl was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a communicator, and she is not.
Well, since we've been talking about the past and we've been speaking about the relationship between Chancellor Merkel and Chancellor Kohl, let's have a look at why this relationship became somewhat broken in the end. Let's have a quick look.
He had given his word of honor. Those who made anonymous donations to the CDU could count on Helmut Kohl to keep it secret. When the deals finally came to light in 1999, Kohl was accused of being open to bribery, something he angrily denied at first.
The manner in which libelous things are being said here is intolerable.
But a former CDU treasurer gave damaging testimony. He said the party had set up a system of secret bank accounts to help hide the names of donors. Kohl admitted to accepting more than 2 million Deutschmarks in undeclared and therefore illegal donations to the party. He resigned as honorary head of the CDU while protesting that he had always acted in its best interests. Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of German reunification, was also the Chancellor who acted for years as if he were above the law. Many of his political allies and followers never recovered from the shock.
Well, Matthias Lohre, we just saw the financial corruption scandal in which Chancellor Kohl refused to name the donors. Chancellor Merkel wrote a piece then in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung calling for the party to break with Chancellor Kohl, which he has never forgotten.
Yes, and I think it has been much talk about that since, but I think the emphasis has always been on the betrayal by Angela Merkel, and I think that's the wrong focus, obviously. And on the one hand, it's very difficult to deal with this party funding scandal because we don't really know all the details because Helmut Kohl has been has been reluctant to say anything, and the real scandal has not broken out then in 1999 to 2000. So you can only imagine what dimensions this scandal would have been if all the details would have come out. So I think the focus that people focus on now is something different. It's the alleged betrayal of Angela Merkel, and I think that's the wrong question. Obviously, Helmut Kohl was not in power anymore. It's in 1999. He was not the chief of the CDU back then, but it was necessary for the survival of the CDU to say, no, we're not the Helmut Kohl party anymore. Obviously, he has been boss of the party for 25 years, and everybody who was in office and had his or her job because of him. But I think it was necessary for Angela Merkel to say, okay, we have to stop that. And who would have done that if not Angela Merkel?
She was the Secretary General, so it was, in a way, her responsibility to somehow throw a life belt to the party. But of course, she did it at a very high moral price.
And of course, she was discovered. Chancellor Merkel was discovered and protéged by Chancellor Kohl.
Yeah. But that's always the same thing, obviously. Somebody gets into power by the people in office. So it's always the same, that the younger people sooner or later get rid of the older people. It's always the same thing, but the hatred that Angela Merkel has sparked with her action is something that has not to do with her action in itself. It has to do with the fact that she's from East Germany, she's a woman, she's a Protestant, some things that are really, really, that still seem really weird for many people in the party who are Catholics, mostly male, and from Western Germany. So if somebody else would have done it, if Roland Koch, for example, would have done it, I think the history, the story that has been written about this betrayal would have been very different. People would have maybe even cheered that Roland Koch is a bad example, but that this male CDU politician would have made a very brave decision.
And Michael Stürmer, how big of a stain is this, looking back on the political legacy of Chancellor Kohl, this corruption scandal?
It's a footnote, no more. It's a footnote, not for the professionals like you, but for the 99% rest of the population. They see two things as a legacy of Helmut Kohl. One is unification, where Kohl played a key role, not the key role. And the other thing is yet undecided whether the euro was a good thing or a bad thing. And people, look, even the SPD at the time of this scandal, it wasn't a corruption scandal. It was party finance scandal, which is something different. Nobody ever blamed Chancellor Kohl of taking a single mark into his private purse. That would have been corruption. No, it was financing weak parts of the party, especially in the East, and he had promised not to give away the names of the donors. But that is not going to... And of course, the SPD was less than enthusiastic about going too deep into these things because the SPD is also not a party of angels, nor is the CDU a party, let alone the FDP or the Greens. They all have their skeletons in the cupboard and they know about it. So there was a kind of balanced diet of truth. And that's why it will be something for the specialists, and it will be still an interesting case where the money came from, where it went to. All this is not clear, has never been brought out into bright daylight. But this will not decide upon the legacy of Helmut Kohl, what it is worth, whether he was a great visionary and a great statesman, or whether he left us a big problem. The jury is out.
And Pascal Thibault, the jury is still out, says Michael Stürmer, but when it comes to the legacy, even regarding the German reunification, there are some people who are saying that Chancellor Kohl just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Do you think that would be just trivializing his contribution?
I mean, it's it's a very shortened resume, but I mean, okay, he was the chancellor of this country, of West Germany at that time, and I think he was, as we already said, he was a very good analyst of the political situation, of the political atmosphere, and he was able to take quite rapidly decision. Also, some, for example, already some days after the wall fell down, some proposals which didn't develop a big enthusiasm among his friends in the Western countries, and it was. In 11 months it was possible to obtain the reunification. I mean, historically it's quite incredible. And I think what we have discussed before, the scandal, I think with a foreign view, I think I don't think it will probably play a big role in history. First of all, because all these details, of course, are very difficult to understand from France or Italy or the USA, and of course it's difficult, I think, for French people or Italian people or people from other countries to give the Germans lesson, because we also have some very important political scandals and parties. There is also, maybe, we don't know exactly, a Franco-German dimension in this scandal because of the construction of a very important French plant in Leuna, in the former East Germany. We don't know, and so that's what I think. Probably in the French history books or in the European history books, in the future, Helmut Kohl will remain the Chancellor of the reunification and maybe one of the architects of the euro, if the euro remain we remain a success story or not.
Do you have a brief intervention?
I think it's a monumental mistake to think that anybody in the Chancellor's office in Bonn could have done the same thing and perhaps even better. Oh no. This was the greatest crisis of the Cold War ever. And we had crises in the Cold War which could have been very deadly, close to war. And this was also, if it had been mishandled, and there were people in high places in this country, like Oscar Lafontaine, who hated the idea of reunification. There were people in the Auswärtiges Amt who seriously thought you could drag on the international sovereignty of Germany for another 5 years. Imagine, just remember what happened in those 5 years. And you could have a kind of domestic unification as a kind of life-saving operation for East Germany. People completely forget that the falling apart of the Soviet Union, when empires fall, they do so with a bang and not with a whimper. And the Soviet Union fell apart with a whimper, and that was the greatest of all miracles. And until 1994, we had 400,000 Red Army troops armed to the teeth in the country. Now, to sort out all this peacefully, reasonably, with even relatively small amounts of money changing hands, let alone shots being fired, this was one of the greatest achievements of intelligent politics ever, and it played between Moscow, Washington, and Bonn. And also Paris, of course.
Matthias Lohre, it's kind of ironic, isn't it, that the architect of Europe, as Michael Stimmer just said, has been often ridiculed for his provincial background. At the end of the day, we're talking about a great European statesman who had to undergo severe ridicule for being provincial. Yeah. It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
It is, actually, because obviously he has been very popular in Germany, but not popular in these areas that we work in, especially in the so-called leftist media, which
Protestant, North German, arrogant, removed from practical life. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that Northern Germany is not only removed from practical life, it is practical life because they inhabit Northern Germany. But obviously it's true that even especially from the 70s on, when Helmut Kohl joined the national stage in Germany, he had been ridiculed for his accent, for his background, for his hobbies, and for his intellectual views. And well, that is, I think, the main part which makes it so hard for many Germans to accept his greatness, because his character is just not that great, but his historical actions have been great. So it's really hard for people to accept that this man, who supposedly had a dog in the 80s, who he taught to bark whenever Helmut Kohl said Soz, so Social Democrats. I mean, that's in some way even primitive, and so it's really hard for many people to accept that this man achieved what nobody else had achieved. And I think even today there are some people who think, oh, what would have been if Helmut Schmidt had achieved that thing? Because Helmut Schmidt had this air about him that people would have liked to be the Chancellor of the reunification. And so
how do you explain that the country is still wrangling over how to assess Chancellor Kohl's legacy? Because public opinion, if you look at it these days, still somewhat split.
It's still, I think, Helmut Kohl has always been the way that many Germans are, and Helmut Schmidt and other people have always been the way that Germans would like to be. And so it's really...
If you leave out the SPD, Helmut Schmidt was shot down by his own party,
yes,
don't
but now
forget.
They really like him, now that he's not in office anymore. But that's true, yeah.
And Chancellor Kohl is set to get his own stamp. It's an honor that no living chancellor before him had been bestowed upon. What do you make of this, Michael Stürmer?
Well, in the age of email, it's less important than in former times, but it is quite a visible honor, and I think it's well deserved.
And do you think that the split public opinion on Chancellor Kohl these days is somewhat justified?
Well, we'll continue. I mean, we are all split because with all the admiration for the statesmanship shown in 1990, the euro is our common destiny. And nobody can tell you today what will happen to the euro in a year's time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. The jury is still out on that one. And it is essentially linked to the other great achievement, namely unification.
And that jury really is still out on the European reunification. Now, Pascal Thibault, Chancellor Kohl has been somewhat in the headlines as of late, not due to his political legacy, but due to his private life. His two sons have written books about what they perceive to be a sad childhood, the tragic suicide of his wife, and now the second wife, who supposedly keeps former confidants sort of at bay. What do you make of all this? Do you think it's a shame that it has come down to this?
I don't know if it's a shame. I mean, it's some part we have talked before about the difference between between what Helmut Kohl is or represents and his perception in quite a lot of in the medias, in the German medias, and in the intellectual scene in Germany. And that's an evolution. Maybe it's some sort of I think probably today the private life, if it's good or not, it's another question. The private life of politicians, I think, plays a bigger role than in the past. And I think I have the impression in 30 years ago, the private life of Helmut Kohl was something very perfect, with wonderful holiday pictures from Austria with his wife. And nowadays, like for other politicians, private life and crisis, relation problems, etc., play a bigger role. And that's and I mean, somehow it makes him maybe more human, because I think for somebody in the street here in Germany, he is like somebody of like a lot of people are, like quite a lot of people we all know, with their family problems, with their crisis, etc., and not a symbol, a perfect symbol of I don't know, of an ideal politician.
And Michael Stürmer, you've worked with Chancellor Kohl. As someone who placed so much emphasis and importance on discretion and loyalty, do you think that all the stories out there these days and biographies on him and revelations on his private lives, how do you think he's perceiving all this?
Well, if you don't have to be disciple of Sigmund Freud to understand that sons have a tendency to murder their fathers. I find it tasteless, this mix of unfairness and self-pity, and they shouldn't have done it because they also profited immensely. You don't go through life as a victim if you are the son of a chancellor. So apart from that, the other problem is, of course, his first wife. And he was married more to politics than to his wife. But that is part of the game. And I'm not going to spill any beans here, but it's not that unusual. It's one of the conditions of political success. Politics is a man-eating habit. And this was, in a way, tragic. She tried to support him as much as she could. At the same time, she wanted to save her own identity. And after some years, this was more and more and more difficult. So there is a very real human tragedy behind all this.
And Matthias Lohre, beyond the human tragedy, how do you think next generations, future generations, will look at the Kohl years?
I think they will look very mildly on these years because, on the one hand, I do think that the party funding scandal is not something that you should neglect, but I think that's something that people will neglect. And so I think that people will view the Kohl years in a very mild way because, on the one hand, it showed unbelievable stability. For 16 years we had this chancellor, although the years themselves were not very easy to live through, but still, if you look back, it looks like that. And but still, and there we are at the beginning of the show again. Still, the big question is how will the euro crisis will be dealt with, and so this will have an effect on the view of the Kohl years.
So the euro crisis will very much determine the Kohl legacies in the aftermath. I want to thank my guests for a very spirited discussion on the political legacy of Chancellor Helmut Kohl. I want to thank you out there for tuning in and looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.